Okay, so hi, my name is Aeryn Yamazaki, and I will be going over my proposal for my senior capstone project, which is based on Asian American representation in fictional media. Okay, so a little bit about me. Yeah, as I said, my name is Aeryn Yamazaki, and I spent my entire college career at University of Hawaii, West Oahu, and I graduated from Mililani High School in May of 2021. I majored in creative media with a concentration in communications and new media technologies, though I initially started in general creative media. And I guess a little extra info. I do plan to like go into graphic design, but another one of my passions is digital illustration, which is going to be a big part of what my project's going to be. Okay, so today I will be going over my plans for my senior capstone project. Then I'll be reading out my thesis statement and then going over the rationale and objectives for my research conducted, and finally I'll be going into the significance of my proposed project with my research. Okay, so my thesis statement is as follows. So Asian representation in media has steadily improved and increased over time, especially in the current era where Asian media such as anime and K-pop have rapidly risen in popularity. With this in mind, it is important to continue expanding upon representation, especially in Western media, by allowing more creators to tell the stories they want. Okay, so for the objective and rationale, so my objective in my research was to understand the history of like Asians and Asian Americans in fictional media, including stuff like tropes, stereotypes, real life sentiments, stuff like that. And then I took that information and applied it to more recent Asian American media, so I could get a better idea of what has improved in terms of representation and what could still be done. So as for my rationale, I was inspired by a few things. So, besides being Asian myself, I've always been invested in the conversation surrounding diversity in fictional media and like art spaces on the internet. I had like the personal observation that representation for minorities has like generally improved, like vastly in comparison to portrayals that we've had in the 20th century, but there are still problems, such as limiting what representation gets made, or like ample marketing attention, or like blind spots that could negatively or overshadow the representation of other groups. So basically, with all that in mind, I wanted to explore ways that representation for Asian Americans can appear beyond what is common or accepted in the mainstream, or just what generally hasn't been done yet. So for my senior capstone plan, I plan to deliver a sort of proof of concept for a semi-animated comic web series by the end of the semester. So over the next 15 weeks of the next semester, I would essentially be working on a storyline, script, uh, storyboards, and the final pilot episode, which would be about like 30 minutes, and possibly in like three parts, that are 10 minutes each. Yeah, the concept for the overall story is a serialized supernatural comedy mystery following a multi-ethnic Asian American family of monster hunters posing as convenience store owners and their employees as they solve local mysteries. So even though I do intend this to be a story where the characters just like happen to be Asian, I'd be incorporating my research through underlying nods of things like past Asian media um, representation, purposely defying various stereotypes, and taking inspiration from Asian media such as anime. So I am still like figuring out the actual storyline for the specific pilot that I'm going to be working on for the capstone, but I do have like a rough idea of what it could potentially look like. So I guess I pretty much just have to like figure out what exactly they're hunting in that episode. Yeah, and finally, this pilot episode would essentially serve as like a foundation or guide map for a larger project that I plan to like continue like well after graduation. We're gonna get into the significance now. My first point of significance is that media, such as film, are very instrumental in influencing public perceptions of basically anything. This has been particularly true of portrayals of racial minorities through stereotypes, including Asians and Asian Americans. So in the case of Asians, Asians have historically been portrayed as like either like these exotic evil invaders encroaching on American values, or as like a submissive, non-threatening model minority, or just these like comedic relief caricatures and side character roles. So for the future implications, like obviously that's not good for representation at all because it leads to things like outright anti-Asian racism in real life, microaggressions, and like overall just not taking Asian Americans seriously when it comes to stuff like work, mental health, dating, and just generally making them feel like othered within like the larger American society. So of course, I believe that the most effective remedy to that when it comes to our fictional media would be to portray Asians in Western media normally with like no stereotypes or even overtly define them, which is basically what I'm trying to do with my story, which has a cast of mostly Asian characters. And my second point of significance is Asian representation is improving in Western media, but it is still limited in terms of the amount of Asian American made media that gets made. So we have had some like significant wins in terms of representation within the past few decades. I just want to get that out of the way. So, like Crazy Rich Asians comes to mind as one of the most like influential Asian American media in recent times. And in addition to that, we have like, Everything Everywhere All at Once and To All the Boys I've Loved Before and like Fresh Off the Boat. I know there's more like, but I feel like those are like a handful of the biggest titles we have so far. And these have already like helped to break some of the stereotypes that were prevalent in the past. However, as I mentioned, there is a question that I went into the project with, which is what can we do more? So as an example, Yellow Face by R.F. Kuang is one of my favorite books, and even though it's about like the publishing industry, which is still media, it is like based off of like the author's like personal experience with the publishing industry, and one of the sub themes was that it brings up is like how marginalized authors who break into the industry are often like restricted to making stories about their community's struggles or based on their culture's mythologies rather than having the freedom to write about like literally anything else if that's what they want to do. So for the future implications, because of that idea and some of the statistics that I'll get into shortly, Asian American representation can be further expanded upon, not only in increasing the amount of it, but also by allowing Asian American creatives to explore more stories beyond stuff that is like specifically rooted in culture or like the quote unquote Asian American experience. Like, of course those stories should still be made, but yeah. So yeah, this kind of expansion on representation would help like further like I guess normalize Asian characters in media beyond just stuff that gets marketed as like Asian American media. And I believe that my project would address this because it's got like a specific like combination of like storyline, aesthetics, and tone that I don't believe I've seen in like Asian American led shows, movies, or books, and so on. That at least the ones that like I've encountered or like looked up for this capstone. And I also just want to bring up, hopefully with the success of like Asian media such as like anime and K-dramas in Western countries, people might now actually be at least a little bit more open to the idea of like Asian characters in a more diverse variety of scenarios. So as you can see here, like Demon Slayer Infinity Castle like got like $729 million in like box office revenue. So that's like pretty significant. And of course, like we gotta take into consideration like the global popularity of K-pop Demon Hunters. Like that might also like influence how open like people are to like more Asian representation. So now onto the data. So I guess the first one that I want to draw your attention to is the Asian American population via the Pew Research Center. So as of 2023 here, Asian Americans make up only like 7% of the US population. And the second point of data here is from the UCLA Hollywood Diversity Report. So it says here only like 2.3 out of 10 theatrical film directors were people of color. And I think this was also in like 2023, so still kind of recent. And finally, the data here via the Asian American Foundation. So this is as of 2025. 6% of Asian characters were in the top 100 works were in leading roles. 3.8% were leads on broadcast TV. 3.2 were leads on streaming, and only 1.9% were leads on cable. So basically, what all this says like together is that Asian Americans are already like quite a small portion of the population, still like very clearly underrepresented in both the creative force and fictional character lead departments, even if it has like increased in recent years, and we're like seeing like lots of um like a significant amount of like popular media kind of arising. And the UCLA thing is just for people of color in general. So of course it shows us that like Asian representation is actually still quite lacking, but it also calls into the question the amount of stuff for Asian Americans that is actually getting greenlit and how those projects might be judged based on like the marketability or quote unquote safety of storylines. All right, so my target audience for my capstone project. So of course my primary target audience would be Asian Americans, but if we want to get like more specific, I would say like Gen Z, older and middle specifically, and like those who are like third, fourth, like fifth gen. This is because most of the main characters in my story, they generally fall under these categories, and it's like also kind of pulling from my own experiences too. So yeah. And the story also focuses on an East Asian family, so I guess I would consider like East Asians as like the main sub-demographic in this target audience, but I would say that it could also appeal to other types of Asians because yeah, I made sure to include like Southeast and South Asian characters in the main cast too. And I guess some bonus target audiences that I would consider. So I guess it would also appeal to I guess like fans of Asian pop culture or just culture in general, and also fans of the paranormal, mystery, and comedy genres. Because those are the main genres of my story. Okay, so for my proposed solution, so basically, while my one project is most likely not going to absolutely like transform like Asian American representation in entertainment, like say Crazy Rich Asians, my hope is that it will simply offer another unique perspective on I guess what an Asian story can look like, or I guess just what a story with Asian Americans can look like. Since representation can mean a variety of things, my project would specifically be focusing on character representation, so like exploring, I guess, like subtle representation, what it can look like with a majority Asian cast. So basically, I would just consider it like one more thing to add to the overall corpus of Asian American like characters and stories, like truly hopefully in a way that hasn't like been entirely done before. And I also want to say that like it being an independently made web series like could also potentially build upon like a path away from like the constraints of Hollywood or other like traditional means of fiction distribution. Okay, so for the prep and process, so for pre-production, so I would basically be starting off with like actively finalizing and refining like a storyline for this like test episode, and then eventually turning that into a script and storyboards. And I would also be doing like extra like I guess cultural research is needed depending on I guess like how the story actually goes. And I would anticipate that it would maybe like take up like the first 2 weeks of the semester. So yeah. And for the production, so I would say that the production phase will take up like most of the rest of the semester. So I'll probably be doing the process like scene by scene, wherein I draw all the necessary assets on a scene by scene basis, and by assets I mean like basically all the character sprites, dialogue boxes, backgrounds, like other necessary props that a scene might require. And these would either be done in the Procreate, Clip Studio Paint, or a combination of both. And for post-production, so after all the scenes get their assets, I'll be stitching them all together in video form in Premiere Pro and or After Effects, depending on the motion needs for any given scene. So I would basically be stitching them together in sequential order and then adding subtitles, music, and visual sound effects as needed. And then finally, I would post it on YouTube. Okay, so we're gonna get into the deliverables. So basically, I just want to like start off with my story inspirations just to give an idea of what to expect out of the story itself and its connection to Asian American representation. So as you can see, I put Fresh Off the Boat and Kim's Convenience on the left here because I intend for my project to sort of like build off of that like Asian American family like comedy type of story. However, on the right, I also put shows such as Supernatural, Umbrella Academy, and the anime Sakamoto Days because the actual like vibe and aesthetic of my story is like a combination of these three shows. And I would also say that the story progression is also inspired by like the Monster of the Week structure of Supernatural season one. So there's that too. So basically, in summary, all these put together is my project, a comedy about an Asian American family, but with a combination of like paranormal, supernatural, like action anime vibes. And I also want to get into like the structure of the project. So basically I'm taking inspiration from like other web series on the internet that I guess are more like pictorially or like comic based on the average like indie animation on YouTube or whatever. So here I have like screenshots of two different like short form comic series from an artist I follow. So this is Camp Redacted and Housewife by Miranda Parkin on Instagram. And I think these are like the closest to how I imagine my episode and overall series looking, which is I guess I would describe as like a sequence of drawings and like caption dialogue in video form. However, like rather than just the written dialogue, I might like add like Undertale-esque pixel voices to my character's dialogue just to add more auditory interest. And finally, I just want to uh, go over or like give you an idea of what my actual art style looks like, how it would look in the final project. So yeah, these are also some of my characters that you'd probably be seeing in my project. And yeah, thank you. I'm gonna leave it open to questions now.